Hey there YouTube, I'm Yukitsu, this is the Yukitsu Times, welcome to my channel, welcome to Total War Warhammer. So we're up to the Imperials, and the Empire is one of the better factions in this game thanks to their fairly diverse roster of units that all act fairly differently from one another, allowing them a pretty broad variety of effective strategies, making it hard to counterpick against them, and making it easy for them to counterpick against their enemies. So let's start off because they have got quite a large roster. First of all, you've got the General of the Empire, your typical melee type lord. He can go on the Warhorse, Bartered Warhorse, Imperial Pegasus, or the Imperial Griffin. Now, this is a very generic type lord, but he does have Hold the Line as an additional ability. Very, very standard sort of melee statistics, but Hold the Line is a fairly good support ability, making this sort of one of the more supporty type generals, with one of the only ones out there with two aura type abilities with Stand Your Ground as well as Hold the Line. Nothing too outstanding otherwise. Now, you can put him on the Imperial Griffin. This does add Blood Roar, which is a -8 leadership debuff against enemies, which is actually quite effective. I actually think this is a really good one. The area of effect on it being 40 meters, that's a pretty wide radius. You can really swing a battle by using Blood Roar. So I do think that there is some potential to the General of the Empire as being a fairly decent one, although I still think that the Bretonnian one is a little bit better, just the generic generals. Go. Balthazar Gelt is their other one. He's got the Imperial Pegasus or on foot options. Now, Lore Metal is a fairly weak lore as it currently is, and he is a dedicated caster. His melee statistics are absolutely trash. Metal Shifting is the first ability that you got there. Plus 4% armor piercing damage. This is the lore passive benefit. Plus 4% armor piercing damage to every unit in your army. This can be quite good. For example, if you got something like Great Swords, they've got a decent amount of armor piercing damage of 23, meaning that you get an extra point there, but it's not really that much. So honestly, I don't think that this is really a huge deal, but it can be pretty... It can add up over the course of an entire army, so there is that. Next up, you've got Searing Doom as their first spell. It's a typical bombardment, just drops down some damage. It's very, very low damage, not particularly good. Very cheap, though. Final Transmutation. It's an assassination type spell that also affects units around the target. It's got a very long range for an assassination spell and is a point and click, but honestly not that great. I do think there are better ones out there. Gehenna's Golden Hounds, typical Vortex, not particularly good. Got Glittering Robe. This would be a decent augment in some respects. It's not great statistics, but it's also only one ally unit, and it's fairly expensive, making it not that great. You've got the Plague of Rust, which is an enemy debuff. Again, it's pretty expensive for not that much effect, and it only affects one target. You've got Transmutation of Lead, -22% weapon damage, -34 melee attack. This is actually a pretty good one, but it's very expensive at 12. It lasts a long, long time, though, so that sort of makes up for that, and these are good statistics to nerf. Last off, you've got the Earthing Rod, -100% miscast chance as an item. He only gets to use it once per game. Pretty okay, all in all. Now, he's not my favorite of the generals, and he's definitely not my favorite of wizards, just because Lore Metal is such a weak lore right now. And I would never really recommend taking him, but if you do, for some reason, feel like you need to take the Lore of Metal for whatever reason, he's your only option, so you could take him then. Next up is Karl Franz. He is much like the generic one. He's got a little bit more armor, and he's got armor-piercing attacks. He's considered a duelist, although I don't really understand the mechanics behind that 100%. I do feel like that doesn't make as huge a difference as it possibly could. Now, his statistics otherwise are pretty similar, but he has got immune to psychology when he's on foot. He's got the same abilities otherwise as the Imperial General, and he's got Deathclaw. Now, again, I feel like he's weaker than Lowen Leoncourt, just because the Bretonnian passive abilities are better, and he's got more of them. Karl Franz, however, is better as an option if you want to keep him on foot, just because of that armor-piercing weapon that he's got, no matter what he's mounted on. If you happen to have the General of the Empire, the only way you can get the armor-piercing attack is if you put him on the Imperial Griffin. So there's trade-offs, essentially, that you have to make when you're taking one or the other. Typically, though, General of the Empire, when you're mounting him, is a more cost-effective option, even though he loses quite a bit in statistics. Karl Franz is just better if you happen to want to have him on foot by a long shot. If you've got him on a Bartered horse, he becomes a pretty decent combatant all in all. And that's when I would take Karl Franz as opposed to the General of the Empire. Now, you've got the Empire Captain. He's got more supportingness than most of them, with an additional use of Hold the Line that you can use, making him pretty decent. Having the combination of him and your General holding the line across multiple spots makes it so your army is really quite reliable. and he's got the same sort of combat statistics, and these melee characters have been sort of growing on me as I've been playing the game. I don't think that I'd like the sort of spam that some people do, although that is surprisingly effective, but I don't think that these guys are anything too amazing. Warrior Priest, these guys are sort of wonky. They've got similar statistics in many regards to the Empire Captain, a little bit worse in melee combat in particular, with the armor being quite a bit lower. You can sort of close the gap a little bit by taking a Barded Warhorse, which brings him up to 60, whereas the Empire Captain has the 85 by default, but he only goes up to 100, so he only gains 15 from that, whereas this guy gains a massive 30 points by going onto the Barded Horse. So, you know, if you're going to take him, get him with that. I never really take these guys, but they've got a lot of leadership boosts with both the Encourage, the Benediction ability, plus 4 leadership to the units in range. In addition, they've got Soulfire, which is a really weird AoE thing. I kind of feel like if you use this properly, you could potentially use it to avoid assassinations, because it gives you huge magic resistance in an area, but it's also a damage effect strike, so I'm not really 100% sure how to best use this. They've got Shield of Faith, plus 22% damage resistance. This is the same as the Warrior Rune Priest for the Dwarves, except it lasts twice as long and has half the effect, so I personally think that the Rune Priest, is better than the Warrior Priest ability, just because it lets you blunt the full damage from a charge bonus, and this one lasts longer than a charge bonus, but also doesn't absorb as much damage during that initial charge. Next up, you got the Hammer of Sigmar, and this is a self buff, plus 34 melee attack. And then you've got Faith's Bastion, which is another self buff, plus 22% damage resistance for himself. So, the Empire Captain, however, does still have Foe Seeker and Deadly Onslaught, making him all in all a much better combatant than the Warrior Priest. So I would give the Warrior Priest a skip in almost any situation. Next up, you've got the Witch Hunter. They're assassins, essentially. They've got the Accusation ability, which is basically a Spirit Leech. Doesn't take any mana, though. It's very, very effective. They've got a strong missile attack that you can use against enemy opponents, as well as a decent melee attack that's not really superb or anything. Their melee statistics in general, and in particular their armor, are quite low, making them quite delicate. So you wouldn't want these guys getting into a fight, but if you can get them at range, picking away with their gun, they can actually deal quite a lot of damage, as well as assassinating and hunting down enemy characters. But this is a dedicated specialist to that purpose. Next up, the Bright Wizard. This is an interesting lore. It's got the Kindle Flame, which is plus 12% flame weakness. Now, this... I'm just going to double check, make sure I haven't gone over this before. Yep. Okay, so Kindle Flame is an interesting bonus because they don't have any bonus fire damage. Nothing in here does fire damage. And, you know, maybe like if the rockets or something like that did fire damage, that could be an interesting passive, but as it is, it only really augments the other spells in the lore, and I think that the other spells have that taken into account already. First of all, for spells, they've got Fireball, Powerful Explosion. This is actually a pretty decent spell all in all. You can use it for single target assassination to a certain extent, even though it's not great for that. It's also okay for its cost at picking away at enemy units, and it's actually quite strong for taking out enemy cannons for some reason. I find it quite good for that. Flamestorm, your typical Vortex. I do think that this one's actually one of the sort of okay ones, along with like Chain Lightning, but it's still not great. I don't recommend it unless your opponent's really bunched up and you got a good opportunity to use it. I mean, I do use this one. I do think that there are times where it's okay, but it's still not that great. Cascading Fire Cloak is a really good melee augmentation, plus 36 melee defense, plus 36% armor piercing damage. Those are very, very good bonuses, and they work on an area of effects, and it's got a very low mana cost. Like, the combination of effects on this just make it a very, very good buff. And this is what you use if you need to break through a line in a good spot without taking that much damage yourself. I think that's one of the more powerful buffs in the game. Next up, you got Flaming Sword of Ruin. After the last one, this one's quite a disappointment in some respects, but it does change all of your damage to fire damage, which means that Kindle Flame does have a stacking effect with this, but it's still a relatively low-grade bonus just because it only lasts 13 seconds, and it has a fairly modestly higher cost than Cascading Fire Cloak. Now, you could stack the two onto each other and really just wreck face in a certain spot. That could be an option, but that's pretty expensive for a very short duration. I'd rather just use Cascading Fire Cloak every time it can have a cooldown. Next up is Piercing Bolts of Burning. This is your typical stuff comes down from the sky, not very good. And then they've got Burning Head. It's another Vortex. It doesn't deal as much damage, but it does have this minus 8 leadership for 5 seconds, which is really situational and not very good. The reason is that you'll typically have only wavering units when you're in melee combat with an enemy, and this means that you're giving yourself a melee debuff when you're in melee combat with the enemy, which is not that great. Empire Wizards have Arcane Conduit, which gives them an increase to the power reserves, that sort of thing. Very, very useful to have wizards that have access to Arcane Conduit. They can ride around on a warhorse, a bartered warhorse, or the Imperial Pegasus. Next up is the Celestial Wizard. These guys are the exact same as the Damsel for the Bretonnians in terms of lore. The only difference is that they can go on an Imperial Pegasus to fly around a lot if they want to, but they've also got access to the ability, they don't have access to the ability to reduce magic damage, unlike the Damsel. So the Damsel's, in my opinion, a lot stronger than the Celestial Wizard for the Empire. I don't ever take these guys, they're just not worth it. Next up is the Light Wizard. These guys have an interesting lore ability. Exorcism, -4 leadership for all enemy undead, map-wide. Pretty situational, but interesting bonus. First up for spells, they've got Banishment, your typical Vortex. It's a pretty okay one, again. Barona's Time Warp is one of the worst melee buffs out there, in my opinion. It has a very long duration, but its bonuses, I think, don't really complement each other that well, melee attack and speed. Typically, you only need one or the other, and it has a very high cost, so that's why I don't particularly like that one. You've got Light of Battle, which turns your units unbreakable. I don't particularly like this one either. Typically, if you're losing ground in an area, those extra 25 seconds of your units fighting in that spot isn't going to really change much. It just means that they're going to lose the fight in 25 seconds, and it probably means they weren't doing that much damage to begin with. If you had units that had really low morale but high damage like Trolls, this could be useful for that situation, but since they don't, it's not. Nut of Amentok, this is an interesting one. You cast on enemy units and it stops them from moving, which is a fairly effective strategy if you've got like guns and stuff like that trained in on your opponent, stopping them from moving and causing a lot of damage to them. Blunting an enemy charge, allowing you to get really good charges where they're stuck in there, that can actually work out to be pretty strong. Next up, Faw's Protection. I don't like this one because it's single target, fairly short duration. Has got a decent bonus though, plus 36 melee defense, plus 15 armor. Next up is Shem's Burning Gaze. This is a very powerful assassination tool, and you can use it if you get a good shot lined up against knights and stuff like that and deal good damage against that sort of thing. It's basically like a cannonball against those sort of things. Very, very decent spell for a low price. This is what you'll typically see Empire players assassinating enemies with. Alright, so that's all their characters. They've got a fairly large character roster, but moving on from there to infantry, we got the Spearmen. Spearman is a very basic infantry type unit, very economical, but they've got fairly low statistics overall, but their price makes it so that they're very worthwhile. Bonus versus large makes it so that they're pretty okay at holding off against things like knights or trolls or what have you without necessarily being great against them, but they are cost effective against them, and their high leadership means that they'll slug it out against that kind of thing for quite a long time before they break, even if they aren't going to cause the most damage. One of the nice things about the Empire roster is that high leadership, allowing your infantry to hold an enemy in place for a lot longer than you'd expect, while your more mobile elements slam into the back or finish them off on the flanks or something like that, allowing you to roll into the rest of them. Still, you can't expect them to hold the line against really elite infantry for very long. Next up is the Spearmen with Shields. A little bit more melee defense, and the shield bonus as well makes them a little bit more durable. They're all in all pretty similar to the Spearmen without shields, though. Typically, I just take the regular ones because 100-point difference. These guys are not worth 100 points more just for the plus 6 melee defense in the shield. Next up are the Swordsmen. Fairly decent melee statistics, very good melee attack, decent weapon damage, but fairly low defensive statistics. Again, they have got decent leadership, however, so it's all in all a fairly good economical unit, and for their cost they can actually do quite well. I don't typically take very many of these because a lot of the time you need armor piercing or you need bonus versus large, either of those things. So they're kind of fill in a situation where you're not going to see too often, although they can be quite good against things like orcs. Next up are the Halberdiers. These guys have both armor piercing and a bonus versus large. They have slightly higher statistics in some respects compared to the Spearmen, but they cost quite a lot more, double what you pay for a regular Spearman unit. So these guys don't make the best backbone of the army unless you're up against things that you know are going to be both armored and large, in which case they become very, very strong. Things like demigryph knights, for example, these things are quite a cost-effective solution against them. Next up are the Great Swords. These guys are the premier anti-infantry unit for the Empire. They're pretty expensive at 950, but less than things like Black Orcs. They've got good armor, leadership. Their melee attack and melee defense are pretty weak for an elite unit, but they're not bad either. Their weapon strength is quite good at 32, lower than many, but they've still got that bonus of versus infantry of plus 10, making them deal a lot more damage than you would expect them to. Very good charge bonus, solid unit size. They're a pretty decent anti-armor unit, and I do think that they can duke it out quite well against many other types of armored units. But but they are quite inefficient if they're stuck in a fight with things that are not heavily armored, and if they're against things that are not heavily armored and armor piercing, then they're going to be very, very, very cost ineffective. Next up, you got the missile infantry. The crossbowmen are good at dealing damage, but unlike, say, the dwarven ones, they're not actually good at going skirmisher to skirmisher because they don't have the armor and shield. They're not cost effective like the Bretonnian archers. They're not super sort of durable in a standard fight like the orc ones or the dwarf ones. Like they're sort of just there to shoot at things while not getting shot at themselves. So because of that, I think they're a little bit overcosted for what they do. Not exactly my favorite unit, but they fill the role that they're supposed to quite well. By contrast, the handgunners, I think, are much more cost-efficient than their dwarven equivalent. They've got decent missile damage and so on and so forth, exact same as your typical handgunner unit for the Thunderers. Now, the thing is that gunners are not meant to begin with to get into a skirmisher versus skirmisher fight, so the fact that they're not good at it and they're not cost-effective in that context really doesn't matter that much. What they are good at is dealing huge amounts of damage to armored units very, very quickly. So for that purpose, they're better, and they're cheaper by enough compared to the Thunderer that I think that they're actually better at it. The Thunderer's got better statistics for a long-range skirmish that you're not supposed to get into with them. So I think that these guys make for a fairly good choice. And of course, the crossbowmen, still take them if you do feel like you're going to need missile infantry for whatever reason. They're not exactly terrible at their job, it's just that they will not be cost-effective in skirmisher fights. If they can stand there and fire, they're just as cost-effective as any other, or they're just as effective as any other, even though they're less cost-effective than the Bretonnians, who are more devoted to that. They're less cost-effective than the Arrow Boys for the Orcs, who I think are a little bit cheaper. Yeah, they're 25 cheaper. And they're not just as tough as the Dwarven ones, so, you've got to watch out for that. Cavalry and Chariots, you've got the Empire Knights as their basic 900-point knight. This is something that is just lower in statistics than something like Knight of the Realm. And unlike the Orc Boar Boy Biggin, this guy doesn't have any bonuses, so this is actually a fairly middling knight unit. They're quite good on the charge, though, so if you can get those shock charges from behind, they can deal some good damage in that respect, and they're not terrible at that sort of job. I don't tend to think that they're very good, though. I just take them if I happen to need cavalry for whatever reason to get around my opponent's flanks, get around the rear, and do those rear charges. But even then, they're not the best at it. Reichsguard are the upgraded version of this, more armor, more charge bonus, a little bit more melee attack. They're a fairly solid unit, all in all. It's nice that they've also got more weapon damage, but again, nothing too special about them. They're a little bit overcosted, 1,200 for what they do. And this is partly because this tier of cavalry just isn't that important in this particular version of Total War. Infantry can hold their own pretty well against cavalry in this version, so you can get stuff done with them, but they're not amazing at it either. Next up are the demigryph knights. These guys are heavy-hitting enough that it breaks that. They're the exception to that rule. Their armor-piercing damage gives them additional benefits there. They have huge charge bonus, huge damage, huge armor, very durable, great melee attack, good melee defense. These guys are absolute monsters on charge. Now, most people, however, take the demigryph knights with halberds, who have the bonus versus large, and it's a very, very big bonus versus large, making them effective monster hunters. And that's basically the role that you'll want to give with these guys if you're taking the ones with halberds. Now, if you're taking the ones with lances, rear charge, they're overkill on it, but they will do it, and they're one of the few units that can sort of charge into the front of some types of units and win, which is rare for cavalry. Very, very effective unit. The only problem is that they're very expensive, and if they get hit by something like Fate of Bajuna, then the entire unit basically gets wiped for free. Next up are the Pistoliers. This is your typical ranged skirmisher cavalry. They got the Parthian shot, they can run around in circles. The only problem is they got a very short range, and their ammunition's a lot lower than you'd think, because they fire basically 2 shots per volley, meaning they've actually only got 12 volleys. They have got decently good damage, though, per volley. I think that they sort of have more bursty damage than, for example, a Goblin Archer Rider. So the next one is the regular Outrider. These guys have longer range guns, but they move slower, making it harder to skirmish with them. They don't have Parthian shot. The only benefit to these guys is that they've got very good armor-piercing missile damage, fairly high rate of fire, and a decent amount of ammunition, making them quite deadly by contrast to the Pistoliers. They're very, very good if you can get them around a flank or something like that and have them sit there firing away for the rest of the battle or what have you. If they've got a good angle doing that, then they're going to make their points back. If you don't have them doing that, then they're probably going to get caught out by wolf riders or hounds or something like that and get torn apart. Very interesting unit, but hard to use effectively. Let's go ahead and delete some of these units here. Alright, so next up we got the Outriders with grenade launchers. These guys, I haven't really figured out a great way to use these. The missile damage on these guys is quite high, theoretically. That sort of explosive makes it so that they can deal area of effect damage, crippling larger units quite effectively. They're, still slower. They come in a smaller unit size. They're kind of a weird unit. I'm not 100% sure how to use them effectively and haven't figured it out yet. I'm not the sort of player who will figure out a great way to use these, I'm sure, but I'm sure someone will because they've got a lot of potential here. Lots of ammunition if you can fire it all. They've got good damage. So, I mean, they're all in all, there's nothing particularly wrong with them. It's just that I haven't figured out how to use them effectively. First for artillery, they've got the mortar. Long range but shorter than cannons. It's got an arced fire. It's got a decent missile damage but not armor piercing. Not a great weapon. There's no real point in taking it. It's like the extra 50 points that you're paying, get the great cannon. It's got much longer range, good armor piercing damage, very devastating weapon, and that flat trajectory tends to just be much more effective in this game. I do think that the Empire's Great Cannon is one of the best siege weapons in the game because of that extra pip of range compared to the other ones. And it's just all in all a very deadly sort of weapon. Next up you got the Hellstorm Rocket Battery. Theoretically it's got a lot of ammunition, but it actually fires volleys of 3, so you're actually sitting at 22 shots with this thing. It's got very good range, just like the Great Cannon, but it's not really going to cause this much damage per volley because so many of its rockets are going to go wildly off course. The accuracy on this thing is appallingly bad, to the point where it's practically useless. Like, the poor accuracy here is an understatement. It would be nice if it shot like volleys of, say, 7 or something like that, or 6 or something like that, and had more ammunition and fire that's sort of such that some of them are going to hit, but as it is, like, very few of those hit. Hellblaster Volley Gun is the next one. It is also disappointing. Fairly short range, and its missile damage is divided between 9 shots there. Now, unlike the organ gun, these shots don't penetrate, so what you're looking at is basically 9 handgunners, and I mean like 9 individual people handgunners, like not 9 units of this, I mean 9 of these people. And you're paying a hell of a lot more for that privilege, so you might as well just take a unit of handgunners rather than the Hellblaster Volley Gun under most circumstances. I think that they need to do something with this. I'm not really 100% sure what. Maybe change the missile volley to 20 shots and increase the range to 250 would give it something to do, but I don't really know. Even then, it would be pretty weak. Next up is the Luminarch of Hysh. This thing has the highest single-shot damage of any weapon in the game. It's great for assassinating things like flying generals on dragons and stuff like that. It has good damage aura, or anti-damage aura, or protection plus 12% physical resistance. Its other activatable locus of Hysh, reduced power recharge rate for enemies around you. That's not that useful, just because your enemy's not going to have a wizard standing within 30 meters of the Luminarch. But basically, this thing's huge damage on that single shot there, fired every 20 seconds, is enough to cause a lot of concern for a general. Like 2,100 points of damage on a hit. If you hit Karl Franz with that, that's over half his health just from one hit, so you need to sort of consider just what you're getting hit by when this thing hits you. It's really devastating. Next up is the Steam Tank. This thing's quite reliable. One thing I should say about the Luminarch before I continue on actually is that despite that, it's not very reliable. If he's on foot, if he's flying fast, if he's moving sideways, this thing's going to miss quite often, and it's a huge point sink, and if you're unlucky enough to miss a lot of shots with it, it's really going to disappoint you for its huge points cost. But there are certain times where it just could be potentially quite useful. But anyway, moving on to the Steam Tank, this thing's got a decent missile damage here. It's got a very good armor-piercing shot there. Fairly high rate of fire for that cannon that it has mounted. And it's decent at melee combat too, with its armor-piercing damage being quite good. Its ability to ram things quite highly with its charge bonus. It's unbreakable. It's got huge hit point pool, huge armor, making it very effective for just running over an enemy while pewing away with its cannon. Very decent unit, but again, it is very expensive. If your opponent gets against it with something that has armor penetration, it is going to be in a lot of trouble. Generals tend to be able to rip it to shreds quite effectively as well, so you have to watch out for this. There are some pretty easy counters against the siege tank, but if you don't have those or they get killed first, this thing can run around with pretty much impunity, and it can also deal a lot of damage before it goes down if your opponent is having trouble getting to it. if your opponent is using something like a large giant, or if they're using like crypt fiends, you can have a unit of demigryph knights standing like right around it with halberds, and they'll take care of anything armor piercing that comes after your steam tank. If they come after with something like great swords, you can just run away, because this will easily outspeed something like great swords, black orcs, anything like that. So it's all in all a pretty decent unit, but it's just so cost effective. It's just not necessarily cost effective depending on what you're fighting against. It really depends on how much damage you're going to be able to get done with the cannon in a lot of cases, and how much you can ram through enemy units without them being able to counterattack, because if they have anti-armor units, this thing's going to be in for a world of hurt. Alright, let's give a go with the battle here. Alright, found a match right away. Alright, so we'll switch over to the Empire. We'll see what our opponent is taking, but we'll go ahead and knock that out there. Typically, I prefer taking the Empire General of the Empire. I think that he's just a little bit more cost-effective. Well, quite a bit more cost-effective than Karl Franz, but there are times where you play Karl Franz instead. In particular, when you're staying on the ground, I think that he's quite useful. So if you're up against something like, I don't know, I think Dwarves, I think Karl Franz is a little bit better. But if you're against someone like Orcs, you can take the General of the Empire, put him in the air, and he'll be fine. Okay, I'm wondering if my opponent actually is just going to be playing as Bretonnia. If he is, I don't want to be anywhere near the air. Let's go ahead and take a Barded Warhorse here. We'll go ahead and take a Light Wizard here. Keep him on foot, that's fine. And we'll go ahead and take... we'll just take 4 of the regular spearmen. We'll take a few great swords. Actually, no, we won't take great swords against Bretonnia. What am I thinking? We'll take swordsmen against Bretonnia. They're one of the few things that they're good against. Let's go ahead and take crossbowmen. Not cost effective here, but it is what I've got. I think demigryph knights are very effective against the Bretonians. So we'll go ahead and take 2 units of them. I could take artillery for a couple of slots there, but I don't necessarily think that that's worth it. You could go ahead and take an Empire Captain. That might be a better choice. I could actually afford like 2 Empire Captains if I wanted to. Empire has so many good heroes that it's hard to decide if you're going to take them or not. I think my opponent's like AFK or something, I don't know. I don't know if he actually realizes he's in a match, because that happens, like when you exit a match, sometimes it pulls you into a match right away and you've gone off to do something else while the game's loading or something like that. So, kind of get the feeling like my opponent isn't actually here. So we'll go ahead and hit back. Alright, so we'll try this again. Alright, so we'll hit Empire, we'll see what's going on here. Are you here? Yeah, he's playing Vampires. This is one of those times where I actually think that being in the air is not that bad an idea, and I'll show you sort of how I deal with being in the air with these guys. We might even want another Empire Captain in the air, but let's not do that for now. Alright, so undead are sort of weird right now. I don't particularly like going against them, to be honest, but I'm going to take a steam tank. Do I want to take demigryphs right now? I don't really actually want to take demigryphs right now. What do I want to take? We'll take some great swords just in case they've got lots of graveguard. They don't tend to take a lot of that sort of stuff, but there is always the possibility that they will. Actually, we will take demigryph knights here. Alright, so my opponent hit the start button, but then sort of canceled it. Whatever. I think I might take 3 of them. So this is going to be a fairly weird army. It's going to be fairly small, compact, kind of elite, other than the fact that I've got tons and tons of these crappy spearmen. That's the wrong button. Alright. Now, the benefit that I've got here is that it's going to be hard for him to kill the steam tank with his with the undead roster. So I'm going to be able to fire away without too much risk to myself. Now, the crypt horrors are going to be able to deal a lot of damage to it, but I'm going to scoot around away from that fight before they can actually start fighting me with Cryptors. And hopefully I'll be able to kill off his general and other flyers before he can really deal a lot of damage to me with those guys. One of the things that I've been seeing more of is hex rates lately. It's kind of interesting, but kind of wondering what a great counter to them is, because they're quite strong in certain contexts. It's just that their performance is sort of unreliable, I think. I don't really find a great way to make them work consistently. Although some people seem to. I don't know. So the reason that I had to take 3 units of Demigryph Knights is that my opponent will have access to Fate of Bajuna, which is a very good counter against them. If I can get into combat with all 3 of them before he can use Fate of Bajuna, he'll only be able to really kill one of them before most of the battle is decided. So that's what we're hoping for, that's what we're going to be looking for. This is actually one of those fights that I prefer playing as Bretonia, though, because Lewin Loenkor is really good at killing the Cairn rates, or the Hex rates, depending on what your opponents take it. And because he has magic attacks, so he can just get in there and wreck them absolutely. And the Pegasus Knights are a much better air counter against everything that the undead could take in the air. We're just going to hope that he can't do too much about the steam tank being on the field. Although he could Spirit Leech it over and over and over again, that would actually probably kill it pretty effectively, but it's got such a huge hit point pool that that would probably take a lot of his magic, so if he's doing that, he's not killing my general. Now, currently general sniping is a big part of this game, and depending on what your faction you're playing, you're probably going to be doing it too, and I'm certainly not above using general sniping. The thing is, like, the Empire sort of does defensive general sniping, in my opinion. They create a large zone where the enemy's Manfred can't come into very effectively. And if he does, you start pelting him relentlessly with those light spells. I've taken him in the air because it makes him a little bit more likely to hit those things, I find. Although I'm not 100% sure. Now this is a little bit of a gimmicky looking Empire army, but this is one of the things about them is that they can take these sort of surprising compositions that are a little bit wonky. You know what? I'm going to set it behind a swamp. Just because I can. There's nothing really that an undead player can do to stop me from just being on this side of a swamp. And let's see if we can hide our Demigryph Knight somewhere. I don't think we can. Yeah, not without being way far away from our own battle lines, so we're going to go ahead and plop them sort of behind our own lines here. Let's take our flyers. Alright, so what's our opponent got here? He's got 2 vampires. I don't see his general anywhere, so he's on the ground. He's got 6 units of Cryptors, which is pretty typical. I'm going to start attacking these zombies, I think. Actually, no, there's no reason to attack those zombies. Let's go ahead and start firing at these vampires here. Alright, so he's definitely going for assassinations. We're just going to kill his assassins rather than trying to deal with his general. See if we can hit these guys with a cannonball, that would be nice. Yep, winged one of them. Got both of them with that. Alright, so did use Spirit Leech against my steam tank. He really needs to split these guys out. Because they're taking a lot of damage because they're clustered together like that.
Take the ground! Ready the men! See to it! Ready!
And let's do an augmented shot there.
Ready for war!
Might hit my own guy there, but There's some crumbling that they're suffering. Alright, that's one of them down.
The Empire endures! The Empire endures!
Alright, so this is going to be that other one down. Got Black Knights on the flank over there, but I'm not as worried about their wizards now. And, yeah, this is counter-general sniping. I'm not as concerned about dealing with his general, and you'll notice that I didn't focus any of my effort on defeating his general. All I was interested in was getting rid of the assassins so that they could not kill my general. And that worked out really, really well for me. Let's go ahead and get this guy around here. I'm going to start firing our cannon at these Black Knights over here. We'll have our Goon Squad over here as well, actually, as support, since he can't really assassinate me anymore. I can see his general back here. He is indeed on foot. He's got some skeleton warriors back here. He's ramping up his mana pools as well, so let's go ahead and start moving up. Now, the nice thing about this is I do think that the Cryptors are slower than my Steam Tank, so Steam Tank is going to just sort of putter along here, start firing at these Black Knights as soon as they can, and if the Black Knights come in to charge at my Steam Tank can get cover from those hero squads. Here we go, firing at these Black Knights. I think my opponent has given up on life. He's just like, what is this shit? So yeah, counter-assassination, super important in this game. Alright, we're just going to start firing at these zombies, I think, a little bit. Try and kill them a little bit with our Steam Tank. We'll just drive it through there, I think. Now, I could go and assassinate their general. Now, there's nothing that they've got really that can defend against this, so I could just run in there and do that. I'm just gonna run into these zombies here.
Yes, sir, quickly! I am prepared! Yes, General!
Alright, and I can also send in, like, our these guys here. Let's get these spearmen up. That is a lot of Cryptors. Alright, now what we're going to try and do is get a banishment off. It's kind of crappy, but at this point in time it can be effective. Let's get rid of these zombies as fast as possible. Alright, so we're going to try and use banishment here. It's not a very effective vortex, but I'm just going to cast it right there. Get these guys in the air. Oh shit. Whew. Alright, just wing me. Now the banishment, as you can see, is doing like 0 damage. Alright, heroic victory. Yeah, this is cheese armies. This is what you get, you son of a bitch. Alright, so gonna go ahead and hit end battle there. Alright, so this was an effective counter-assassination, and I had my composition set up for that. My opponent was really hoping for that assassination to work, I suspect. We had a good amount of demigryphs to counter these Cryptors once they were locked into combat, and I could have double-teamed very easily Manfred von Karstein with the captain and the general of the Empire. The two of them, when he's on foot, he can't even escape. He will easily get bowled over by them. If I'm doing that, then I can very, very effectively start running through the enemy lines. The Cryptors would be quite a problem, but I think that the spear line could hold up okay while we start running these guys over with the Steam Tank and the Demigryph Knights around in the back. So, you know, do unexpected things to the Empire from time to time. It can be pretty effective, it can be pretty funny. If your opponent is really tunnel-visioned in on something and his strategy is reliant on some sort of really ridiculous cheese, you can easily beat them. Like, that was not a very difficult fight. If he had been smarter, he would have pulled all his heroes back, he would have attacked all with everything at once, so that he didn't lose those assassins, and while my lines were more engaged, while I was more focused on doing other things. Maybe he could have assassinated my general, or he could have dodged the light wizard a little bit better, or I'd be busy using those resources to fight something else. But as it was, he was stuck in that mindset that he had to assassinate my general, and because of that he lost both of his vampires. And these are not inexpensive. Like, if we look at this, 1,500 just for that vampire. Like, the cost of those things is absolutely silly. Like, I think that that's sort of one of the mitigating factors of this faction. And if you're taking something like all three of these guys can use the Lore of Undeath. And while he did do the smart thing and made Manfred von Karstein himself hard to kill, that doesn't really matter when his strategy is hinging on these two being able to do something. And, like, yeah, a better player would have sort of spread them out a little bit, but even if he had, Light Wizard could have taken out one of them. The captain would have been able to take out the other one, because the captain actually can crush one of these vampires in hand-to-hand combat pretty effectively. So anyway, that is our look at the Empire as a faction. I think that they've got one of the better, more varied rosters. You can do cheeky things like what I did over there with Steam Tank and 3 demigryphs, with a backbone of like heroes and spears. Like, yeah, it's kind of a silly looking army, but on the other hand, it's a fairly fun army to use. It's also fairly effective, so there's no particular reason to avoid using something like that when you're playing as the Empire. Take their fun units, take their quirky stuff, the Luminarch, the Steam Tank, the demigryphs. All of these things are fun to use, and they're all pretty interesting. And I think that this is going to prove to be one of the tougher factions to beat as people sort of get further and further along in the game. I think that they are stronger right now than the vampire counts, and probably a little bit stronger than the orcs and goblins. So anyway, I hope you found this video enjoyable, and of course, as always, I hope to see you all next time.